One pissed call. Hey folks, my name is Logan Tyler. You might know me from my YouTube channel, Held Captive Media, or my own YouTube channel, which is just Logan Tyler. Usually I do film-related content, but truth be told, I'm a very politically minded person. And in order to stay up on the news, what I always do is I have my friend Jessica call me once a week and just kind of tell me whatever is going on in the world of politics or whatever it may be. So right now, I actually missed her call, so I'm going to give her a call back if you guys want to listen in on the conversation. All right, here we go.
Hello?
What's up? I missed your call. What's good?
I'm so frustrated.
Yeah, why are you frustrated?
Well, while everyone's talking about abortion right now, which I appreciate, I just helped with a protest this weekend. No one's talking about all the other things that the overturning of Roe v. Wade affects.
Okay, I'll bite. Like what?
Right to privacy, right? So, that was, Roe v. Wade was based off of the Fourth Amendment having a little piece in there that says you have the right to life, liberty, and due process, which we've taken, and it's been interpreted as you have the right to, privacy in your life. You have the right to live your life the way you want to, and other people can't tell you how. And they just basically said that that's not true anymore. And that can affect so many things. That's what being able to marry who you want is based on. That's what having access to birth control without infringement from the state is based on. There's so many things that people don't realize. This affects the legal precedent of your right to privacy as an American.
Okay, I mean, I think that's a fair statement too. I mean, it, especially when it comes to the autonomy of somebody, but also just the laws that it represents. So no, go ahead. Yeah.
Even though some states still have anti-sodomy laws on the book, they aren't enforced, and that's because of this legal precedent where it was decided at one point you don't get to make laws about how other people can behave in their private life. Mm-hmm. And so those laws aren't enforced because of that, but with the fall of Roe v. Wade, that leaves the door open for those to get enforced again.
Yeah, I mean, once it all happened with the courts, especially when they're when Obama was leaving office and the Republicans held off electing a judge, and then the moment that there's another judge that can be done within the last 30, 45 days or whatever it was, they elected another one. They've been stacking that Supreme Court. And people, I just don't think understood the severity of it when it was happening. I, being aware of politics when that was happening, was absolutely terrified. And I think that it's starting to come to fruition as to why. And I think that the people who are maybe more selfish-minded aren't seeing how an overturning of Roe v. Wade could personally affect them. I'm hoping that we can talk about how it not only affects their rights, but as well as other things, and sets a precedent for them to overturn more things and blame it on constitutionalism when in reality it's just, biases.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that our Supreme Court cases are what hold up a lot of the other laws we have. Because whenever something big happens and there's a state that makes a law that's drastically different, one side or the other will try to challenge it, right? And then if it makes it to the Supreme Court, then it becomes precedent. And then once a decision's made, they'll make more laws based on that. So there's a lot of laws that are affected because their security as being constitutional was based on this. And fortunately, there has already been 2 pieces of legislation federally that have been pushed to help with the right to privacy. There was a bill to codify or make law access to contraception. Mm-hmm. And there was also one about marriage rights, and they both passed the House, but they have to go through the Senate. And we all know, I believe it's Manchin and Sinema are just sitting there teetering So,
Fucking Joe Manchin, dude.
Yeah. So we have two pieces of legislation, but the crazy part is that in both of those cases, in one of them, I want to say in the marriage, in the marriage rights one, not a single Republican voted in favor of making marriage rights law. And
I saw that. That was startling. I mean, I understand that it's like, they're trying to make it a partisan issue for their base and everything, but literally all of them, like not one Republican, like it's insane to me.
Yeah, and then I think there was like 3 or 6 maybe that voted for the contraception one, but it's been talked about. I mean, basically since gay marriage was legalized, that like if it were to fall, there's like precautions you have to take, because then you have a married couple who now isn't considered married anymore. So when you have like custody agreements and all that kind of stuff figured out as a married couple, well, that person is no longer automatically their step parent. They don't have those rights anymore. You now have to go out of your way to write up separate legal documents to make sure that those things work. And it's the first thing that like they went for after abortion rights is gay marriage and birth control access immediately.
Yeah, because they knew. They're like, we have the court now, and ultimately everything boils down to that. And it really it's what okay. I won't call it. I don't have a stance against like RGB. Obviously, she's like a legend and everything. But I boil this back down to one thing, and we'll get more into this, but I just have to say this because I really feel it in my heart. I think older people, whether on the right side or the wrong side of my opinions, need to get the fuck out of public office.
Oh, yeah.
And that includes this, like the Supreme Court should have a retirement age, because the fact is that, in reality, it's like all these older people, especially when it comes to the Supreme Court, it's like you don't know when that person is going to pass away, and it can be very sudden. And the way we fill the court after that is so dependent on who's already elected in power at that time.
Yeah, and just the coincidental timing of someone dying or the planned timing of someone retiring while a certain person's in office to replace them with someone that they, like is on the same side as them.
Exactly. It's like all of a sudden they'll I just honestly think that there should be an age limit when you're holding office, in the same sense that you can't run for president until like what, you're like in your mid 30s or something.
Yeah, you have to be 34, 35 to run for president. I think you can run at 34 if you'll be 25 or 35 by the time you're elected, one of those things. But yeah, it's like 35 to be president of the United States.
It's like, okay, sure. I can sense that. I actually think that's I think that's more ageist than my suggestion of adding an age cap. But when people say that, the reactions are horrific.
Yeah. Just wait. When we talk about who holds political power in the country, I'll talk to you about the levels of lead poisoning in older generations and how that affects the brain. Because that's a whole nother issue when you realize that we were using leaded gas for so long, and that only stopped a few decades ago. So everyone over a certain age spent all their life puffing leaded air. That's a whole nother topic. But yeah, definitely term limits are a huge thing, because if you let anyone hold power forever, they're more likely to be corrupt in that power.
And I think that's the term limits for me exist most importantly to the Supreme Court, because now it's like, okay, we have a Supreme Court. There's a lot of young conservatives on that court, and they're very biased, especially what's her name? Oh God, the one they just elected.
Amy Coney Barrett.
Oh my God, she's going to be around for 4,000 years, like Nancy Pelosi. She's going to be like 100 years old in there. So
did you know that the church she went to in South Bend, Indiana, is the inspiration for The Handmaid's Tale directly?
Jesus. Wait, what church was it?
Oh, I hold on. Let me. Amy Coney Barrett Church. Um,
Yeah, shout out to South Bend.
yeah, and it's crazy because she's like literally 45 minutes from where I am right now is
Yeah.
where she's from, and it's called the People of Praise. That's the name of the church that she was in, but it's called a cult, and it is the actual direct inspiration for The Handmaid's Tale,
And it's,
which is absolutely insane because she's literally bringing it
yeah,
about.
I was about to say that's almost like, okay, from a film reviewer's perspective, real fast, of Handmaid's Tale, I had a very, I guess you could say, polarizing opinion of it early on, where I was like, yeah, like it's a good show, but I think that people are thinking it's much more fictional than it can turn out to be. And I swear,
Yeah.
I was on a stream where I said that. I really was, and people were like, "You're crazy," and I just want to flex on those people real fast. Not because then I told you so is worth this situation, but just life imitates art sometimes, and I just think that this whole situation is of near biblical proportions. I mean, it's just such a horrific situation, but for her to be doing this and then be from the church that's directly based on is poetic, to say the least. Anyway,
and you also mentioned Brett Kavanaugh. Something that was interesting about the Roe v. Wade decision is his dissent was partially based around the idea that abortion is not written in the Constitution as a right. It is not explicitly mentioned, and while right to privacy is mentioned in your 14th Amendment right, and also your 4th Amendment right to like unreasonable search and seizure, which claims your body and your property cannot be searched or seized unduly. But right to travel is the next thing that is affected by the fall of Roe v. Wade, but also right to travel is not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution anywhere. So that's the next thing that also is in danger because it's even less protected, and there is one Supreme Court case, it's Bigelow v. Virginia, and that is the place where we have precedent that says a state cannot stop you from traveling for such things. And that one was it was a New York abortion clinic advertising their services in Virginia, where it was illegal at the time, and the state of Virginia tried to sue this abortion clinic, and the decision was based mostly on free speech of just their ability to have the advertisement there. But in the decision, they mentioned that Virginia could not stop its citizens to travel for abortion services, nor can they prosecute them afterwards for going. So it's not in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court decided that you had this right. But now, based on what Kavanaugh said, then that's up for debate again too.
Yeah.
It's not just because Supreme Court made it precedent doesn't mean anything now.
And the pull that these two have, I mean, they've literally, these two justices were assigned in just the last 4 or 5 years, and they have literally so much pull over the entire country now. And what sucks about it too, and back to like, just because I'm kind of on a tangent with the politicians specifically, is like the Democrats and just like pretty much most of the politicians in general, they're trying to use this to campaign on. Like, look at how bad the Republican Supreme Court is. You should vote for the Dems to try to get your. But it's like you're not doing anything while you're currently in office. You're just currently using this as a way to run on a like they're treating it like a meet cute. It's a planned publicity stunt. It's like no. Like, where are you fighting for people at? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You're not doing anything.
It's been specifically noted by some people in some different articles that Biden did pass an executive order that instructs the Department of Health and Human Services to expand resources for contraception and abortion services and to help protect privacy, basically beefing up your ability to get an abortion where you can get it. So the people who are struggling, there's more funding to help get people there. There's more funding to cover the services, just to help in the places that it's still legal. he hasn't, put in an executive order to make this a health emergency, or like there are things he could do to protect abortion, to protect same-sex marriage and those things right now, but he's not.
Because he wants re-election. He wants the Dems to swarm.
That it's about the midterms, and they want to wait. They want to let it be something people can campaign on until November, and then decide if they're actually going to do something about it.
Which 90% of the time, as long as the Supreme Court is stacked, as they put it, in the Republicans' favor, which is true, but still, as long as they use that as like this idea of like, oh, we're going up against that, they're not going to do much to stop it, because it's the ultimate campaign gimmick. They're going to do it until like it's bled dry.
Chip. Yeah, it's just like a bargaining chip they can hold on to and hold on to and hold on to. And especially in this transition time where like some places had trigger laws, so some places things immediately change. And other places are putting forth more and more laws. Like, Texas, before Roe v. Wade was even overturned, Texas had put a law into place that would allow citizens to sue abortion care providers who were out of state for providing an abortion to a Texas resident.
Oh, I remember that, yeah.
Yeah, that in Texas would have been considered illegal because, they have like a heartbeat bill. They're like a super early cutoff date. So even before Roe v. Wade fell, they were like, oh, if you're 10 weeks and you go somewhere else and someone knows, they can turn you in and you can get the doctor or the clinic or whatever, like they can make lawsuits. So they had that already.
And then they had a going forum online where you could like join class actions.
Like a tip line, a snitch line.
Mm-hmm. It was bad.
But I will say, I am very impressed with TikTok-based activism, because there have been a ton of campaigns I've seen where something like that has gone up and people have been like, all right, we need to flood this with just bullshit responses so that they can't find the real ones. And it has gone so successful.
Me and the boys downloaded
Gen Z's activism.
Me and the boys downloaded period tracking apps, and we've just been filling in absolute nonsense. And that's, I mean, honestly, like it goes to show that I actually think, as much as people want to poo-poo the internet, and I do too, the internet's very scary at times, but at the same time, it's finally like a town square where it's really hard to lie to everybody. Like, not everybody can be so easily fooled anymore. But then on the other end of it, though, there's so much like false information out there that gets spread a lot. But anyway, I think
a tool.
Political activism has grown exponentially because of it. Because now anybody can say how they're feeling and put their voice into the conversation versus needing a megaphone or a stand to say what they need to say.
The internet can be a huge tool, and any tool can be used for good and evil, but the important part about when you get people going about something on the internet is like figuring out how to translate that into real world action. And sometimes you can. Sometimes, there have been people who have made bots that, like, they program a bot to flood Ted Cruz's whatever it is, just flood these things so that they can't be used against people. And that's one way where, you can keep it on the internet and it's still actually like really doing something. But getting it off the internet and into practice in the real world is hard. But I will say, a streamer that I watched that does politics recently, he was really working on how to turn his audience into like actual grassroots movements. And on his website now, they have a map. It's just for the United States, but they have a map and it has like key midterm elections that are really important marked, and then you can sign up and put your zip code in, and it will put a little dot on there for every person who put on there or whatever. So you can find other people in your area who at least watch the same political streamer, so they have some similar ideas, and he can turn his audience into actual people finding each other in real life and working together to do stuff with his help. And so that's a huge part of it, because like the internet could be used for anything, and getting people aware is easy, but getting people active is hard.
Yeah, I just remember back in the day, like I said, I've been like kind of politically evolved since like 2012, 2013. And I remember like getting involved in like TYT's Wolf Pack and stuff like that. And like, I just don't think things like that could have happened if it wasn't for the internet.
Absolutely.
And I also think that this overturning of Roe v. Wade wouldn't be even as loud, you know, like there would just be people who were uninformed. And then one day faced with a horrific decision to find out that they don't even have the decision to make. I honest to God believe that's what would happen. I think that's something that happened in the past a lot. So I think it's good that the internet's here to kind of, I don't know, it's sort of like a litmus test for people as well as just like a watching eye of like, okay, what are the people in power doing and what can you do to fuck with them about it?
Yeah, it makes information and resources and all of that more accessible. Because, you know, it's great if you can travel to your state capital and go protest and do stuff there. But if you can't travel there, it's still nice to be able to do things that are organized like more locally and stuff. Because, you know, like we did a protest here in LaPorte. It's not like anyone in LaPorte specifically is, you know, we're not mad at anyone at our courthouse. But the idea is you protest at your government, you know, offices, sort of like because they are a satellite of the state's government and they are like a representation of that. And so even if you can't go to DC or whatever it is, if you can find out about things on the internet and have simultaneous protests in different locations and get the news aware of it, because that's another thing. If you're an activist, all you got to do is email your newspaper and be like, hey, we're having a protest here this day. And bam, now you've got the news there. We only have 30 people at our protest, but we had the South Bend News show up and they interviewed a couple of us. And I don't know if we were on the actual like evening news, but there was like a video on their website and an article and stuff about it. And I mean, that's the South Bend News. That's seen in Michigan and like Niles area too. So all that took is,
not to mention, you know, right-wing Republicans, you know, they're gonna use that against Buttigieg and whatnot, and bring up anything South Bend discomfort or anything. So South Bend has already kind of got like a light on it too, especially with, as you said, you know,
especially since he is
the Supreme Court too.
Official.
But and for people who are thinking about like, you know, gathering, protesting, just doing all that, and they're like worried, like, oh, I see on the news that it's like dangerous and blah blah blah. My dad went to a Black Lives Matter movement in Cincinnati, like a huge city, and was met with nothing but respect from the people at, you know, said protest. But the issue was more the police. So if anything, if you go to a protest, be aware of the police.
Yeah, there was tons of video evidence of police instigating stuff at BLM protests and stuff. But a big misconception that people had about it is like, you know, it seems like half the world was saying it was peaceful and half was saying it was riots. But what was actually happening is the scheduled, planned, official protests would happen in the middle of the day, and it would go, and it would be great, and it would be fine and peaceful, whatever. Those people would go home. And then you would have residual people who, you know, you have people who wanted to stay out and protest and they wanted to be out there all day, and mixed with people who are now coming out as like opportunistic rioters and or trying to start things to be antagonists.
Or the police in plain clothes, as shown through a lot of different cities and reports that came out. There's this Twitter, I think it's called Cop Spotter. I'm not sure if that's the name. Someone can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But it was this guy who would literally analyze protest footage from that period of time during COVID with the George Floyd stuff and everything. Find hidden cops and post them.
Oh, like a Where's Waldo?
Yes, exactly. And you would be startled. I mean, like, I'm saying that knowing that we're pretty, like, anti, like, the establishment of law enforcement. Like, people know that about us. And even then, you would be startled by how many there are.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like it's harder and harder to startle me with, like, what the police do, especially because recently I've learned more and more about how, like, the LA Police Department and several other major police departments literally had gangs within them.
Yeah.
And, like, you would have to kill an innocent person as a police officer, like, on duty to enter these gangs. And it's like, they did a great job at making us think that these weren't just gangs of people hunting down minorities for like a good 100 years, but like it's obvious again, because the internet, we've got the information. We can all now Google LAPD gangs and find out all of the things that they did and how it's active, and like it's absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's wild. And then, like the amount of psychological evaluation done to just like a standard beat cop, especially for Los Angeles, is non-existent. And it really goes to show that you actually need like more training and time to be, for instance, I was a holistic food specialist for animals at one point. I needed more training to do that than a police officer does to be a police officer. And I'm not saying that being a police officer isn't hard. I'm not saying that every cop is the worst cop ever, but it's a corrupt establishment that protects their own.
And if they're gonna be existing the way they're existing, they need so much more training. I mean, even with like police reform and everything, like it needs such different training. Yeah, it's more dangerous to be a pizza guy. It's harder to be a preschool teacher. Like, it's insane how easy
it's harder to be a children's guidance counselor. They found that it is psychologically, you need to go through more training psychologically, amongst other things, in order to become a children's psychologist or even just like a children's like guidance counselor. You need more training than to be a fucking defusing situations police officer.
Yeah, and a big part of it too is trying to think when exactly. I believe it was after 9/11. Sometime after 9/11 is when they really started to militarize our police departments, and they did that by giving them military equipment, but they didn't get military training. Like I don't have a whole lot of respect for the police, and I'm not a huge fan of the military, but I respect people who went through military training more than cops, because people who went through military training, like if you ever see situations where there's a cop, but then there's like a veteran, and the veteran like takes action and ends up handling it better than the cop does, because the cops weren't trained. But the veterans actually were. When you're in the military, you're trained how to handle position, or like negotiate hostage situations and how to de-escalate things. And like, it's not just about getting as many tickets and as many arrests as you can. It's like an actual war, and you're trying to actually save lives. Yeah,
if the Uvalde footage taught us anything, it's that this whole argument of a good guy with a good gun is bullshit. Because even if they are good guys, clearly as a whole, they are fundamentally undertrained. And I don't even just mean, like, sure, maybe they have training for like ballistics training, whatever that may be, but how many of them have like training in like diffusing a situation, like into calming people? Like there's a reason why there's whole Facebook groups and whole YouTube channels dedicated to like, let's catch this cop acting like an asshole. And they just come out with a video every 20 minutes because the footage is endless.
The saying used to be like, nothing is more American than like a lawsuit. But like now, it's nothing is more American than suing the police. Because if you just wait long enough, if you record long enough, most of them are unfamiliar enough with the law, because that's the other thing. They're not trained to handle situations. They're not even trained well in the law and what people are allowed to do.
That's kind of true, yeah. That's kind of true.
If you just wait long enough, they'll violate one of your rights and not even know it. Like, I mean, as long as you know you're not doing anything wrong and the police approach you and question you, especially if you're in a state where you don't have to ID yourself to the police until you're under arrest. If you're in a state like that, half the cops don't even know that, and they'll ask you for your ID, and then they'll arrest you for not giving your ID, and then they'll realize that they can't do that because it's a no ID state.
Yeah, when just doing what I've been doing, I met this guy who he works in Los Angeles. I won't say his name because people would know who he is, I think. But he was telling me a story about how he fell asleep in his automatic like driving car, after like a super long day, And when the cops pulled him over, like, they just kept trying to get him to admit, like, hey, like, I was totally asleep, and they couldn't get him to do that. And because of their, like, fundamental misunderstanding of the law, that in the actual state he was doing it in, it was actually considered illegal just for that state, or at least for that city. He ended up getting away with it because they didn't even understand how to arrest him, even though they already had everything they needed. Because as long as they thought as long as he didn't admit it, they couldn't prove it. But they're just wrong.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Sometimes people get away with things because cops don't know the law, and sometimes people end up getting arrested for something they didn't do because cops don't know the law. Like, I watched this video recently. These two guys had just pulled over to take a nap because they were on, like, a long trip. And the cops tried to say that, like, they had to show ID and they had to leave the area and they were committing a crime by being somewhere unusual or whatever. Like, cops use all these terms, and then you're like, you realize that's not illegal. Like, doing something unusual is not illegal.
Yeah, like, you're not my dad. Don't tell me what to do. Go away, you fucking weirdos. It's always like that. It always is like that. It's crazy. Like, I remember my dad had this beat up van with the window blasted out, and we had tape on our window. And they stopped our van. They tried to, like, get my dad to, like, allow a search. He's like, you don't, like, no, I'm not going. You don't have probable cause. Like, you have nothing. And they're like, yeah, we'll have our dog. And they had the dog out. And my dad literally saw the cop. He'd verify this. So, like, Dad, in the comments, verify this happened. The cop was kicking the dog's butt, trying to get it to bark.
Oh my goodness!
And my dad, being from Gary, was like, "I know what the fuck you're doing." So.
Oh, I can't wait! I can't wait till we talk about like a whole episode on, like, either police stuff or whatever it ends up being. But police dogs, like drug sniffing dogs, total scam, 100% a scam. It is not reliable. I think it's less reliable than lie detector tests. Like, drug dogs are more often wrong than they are right. They are just an excuse to search your car. That's all it is. Speaking of searching into, so, like, we talked about how, like, the Fourth Amendment is a right or a freedom from unreasonable search and seizure.
Mm-hmm.
So with Roe v. Wade.
I was going to bring us back to Roe v. Wade, but good transfer. That was good.
Because we talked about unreasonable search and seizure, and that's backed up by, like, the Fourth Amendment, right? But the whole right to privacy issue kind of puts up in the air what do all those terms really mean, if not what we thought they were based on, like, the decisions that have been made. So that's already up in the air. But it turns out bodily autonomy as a concept, as a right that you have, is only backed up legally by Roe v. Wade.
Yep.
We don't have anything else federally, really. The only example that I could think of that we actually have something legal on the books about your own bodily autonomy is the fact that we recognize, no matter how many lives it will save, you cannot harvest organs from a dead body unless that person consented to organ donation at some point in their life. Because we already believe that person, alive or dead, has a right to have their body treated the way they wanted it to be. And that's something that we've accepted and recognized and all that. So it's like, it's kind of a talking point, or like a good kind of example or like anecdote to use in the pro-choice conversation, because it's like we recognize bodily autonomy for dead bodies. So how are we not going to recognize that body, when it's alive, has the same right to say, no matter how many lives it will save, I'm not going to give my uterus to anyone or anything. I don't want my body to be treated that way.
And people who, like, are hearing this, they're thinking, okay, so what if Roe v. Wade takes away our bodily autonomy? The people who voted for this aren't for taking away our individual rights. Like, you're wrong. Like, I promise you, they may be playing to you as a base right now and being like, we took away abortion because a baby's a baby the moment it's conceived. Like they're pretending like that's their number one thing is their own personal biases, which is already bad, but it's not even the truth. They're playing to their base, and then they're playing to the billionaires that fund and pay them. So eventually, like, if you can take away bodily autonomy through this Roe v. Wade thing, you can eventually also evolve into taking away so many individual rights. Like all these like super hard conservatives that are like the vaccine's chipping you, it's microchipping you. Like this being overturned is the number one step towards that really happening to you.
Yeah, and it's like, I would say look at the past for examples of this, but you don't even have to, because still, to this day, in 2022, often when a woman goes to, or when someone goes to get a, like their tubes tied, or I've even heard examples of this happening in the reverse where it's a vasectomy and the doctor's like, well, maybe you'll meet someone and they'll make you want to have kids. You know, people will be like, I don't want to have kids, just sterilize me. And that they'll be told, oh, you're too young to know, or maybe your significant other will change your mind or whatever. And that's still a problem where people can't just be like, no, I want my tubes tied. I don't care that I'm 23 and unmarried and have no kids. I don't want to have kids. And also, even getting your tubes tied, it can be reversible. Like, you could still, it's not even permanent, even if you do change your mind. But, like, it was popular on TikTok. There was, like, an audio connected to a link, and that link was a Google document of doctors around the country that would give you those procedures, no questions about your personal life asked, period.
Yeah, like, if you already have the mental equity to come up and be like, hey, I want to get a vasectomy, then no one should be able to ask you more questions about it. It's crazy, but that is the reality of it. And like you said, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I'm not talking about things in the near future because real corruption happens over a period of time. But when you let things like this slide and you essentially get rid of bodily autonomy, what's to stop the court from a decade or so down the line, for the Republicans to freak out? What if they force everybody to get vaccines? Oh shit. Like, what are you going to do about it? You don't have a right to your own body. So step. You know what I mean? Like, essentially you can eventually get to that point if you want to look at it through that selfish like vision of like, do you really want to tell women whether they can or can't make a choice with their own bodies more than letting you make your own choices with your body? Is that really how you feel?
And like, it's interesting because, you and I are talking about it in a like gender neutral way where we're just talking about bodily autonomy as a human. But the people going after this aren't going to go after it that way. It's going to be men, white, straight, cis men can do what they want, but trans people can't do which we already have, is trans people having to fight to do what they want with their bodies. Women having to fight to get, their tubes tied, or even like long-term birth control, like IUDs. I've heard stories of people trying to get an IUD, which lasts like 3 to 10 years, and they're given a hard time because they're in prime baby having years and all this. But it's like those can be taken out at any moment. So it's like we already have examples of this.
And like, since when are we so desperate to repopulate the earth with every dumb fuck? Like, if someone doesn't want to have a baby, I'm just going to take it on face value that either they're smart enough to know they shouldn't have a baby, or they just don't want to have one, which in return would mean if they were forced to have one, they'd be fucking possibly very bad at taking care of it. So even if you're looking at it through the negative sphere of like, okay, like people who don't want to have a child are baseless and irresponsible. I don't truly believe that. But if you're someone who's ignorant who believes that, well, then why do you want them to have a fucking baby?
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, there is also the theory that, and I don't know, this is like borderline a conspiracy theory, but the idea that they don't want you to be able to have an abortion, which means they're having forced births on people who don't have the money for kids, which means you're creating more undereducated, low-income people, and that's what the big corporate giants need. They need to make sure there's always undereducated, low-income people that can be their lowest level, like, workforce. And so, like, from the long-term conservative, version of things, that's part of it. That's a benefit for people up in the high corporate ladders who don't care about the individual people working for them. They just know, I'm working them for not enough, so they're going to burn out and they need to be replaced. They're going to burn out, or they're going to die, or they're going to be too poor and have to move somewhere else, or whatever. Like, I need to have this constant flow of people that won't push back because they don't have the resources to, but they need me to pay them.
Okay, hot take. I don't necessarily buy that, but I could totally see that.
Oh yeah, it gives off very like big, scary, like Illuminati kind of like someone take over the world kind of vibe. But I mean, it's not wrong in the fact that that's going to happen because of this. It just may not be their sole purpose in doing.
I mean, we gave up the quality of knowledge when basically millionaires and billionaires and huge corporations got to just give money in rapid amounts to politicians and people in power without question. You know, we lost our free speech at that very moment. In like a real sense, in the sense that, like, you know, money is very corruptible. You know what I mean? So like you could there could even be a politician. There's a few that come to mind actually who, like, in theory, upon, like, you know, their initial, like, political awakening, like, they make total sense to you and they're somebody who has all the right views, and then all of a sudden money comes into play, like with Dave Rubin, right? Like with him as a commentator and a grifter. Money is all corruptible, and when you're allowed to just give it to people willy-nilly without there really being any sort of, you know, limits or even conversation about how much you're receiving, it does grow to this big issue, I think, and it makes me believe that something like that could happen, because all they need to do is use the money that they keep making by continually, you know, corrupting the system.
Yeah, especially in a capitalist society, because in a capitalist country, money is the life source. Because we think, oh no, it's food and shelter and whatever, but you can't get those without the money in such a, like, crony capitalistic country. So it's like in other places where basic needs are taken care of, average people have more political power. But yeah, as long as we're in a place like this where money is the true, like, base power running everything, and it's so unattainable, that's always going to be all it takes to corrupt people.
And when I hear people try to argue in form of capitalism, where they're like, yeah, but you have to consider that, like, life is really a race and there is a limitation of resources, I say to you that is completely man-made. Like, if you actually lay out, especially with, like, the invention of, like, GMOs, right? There is easily enough produce and food that we could create on the planet to feed every single person. It is a known fact. You can look it up. There is not literally a shortage of food on the planet. It's that there are hoarders of food and resources on the planet. So
yeah, we've absolutely made it to the point where we have the technology to provide enough of everything for everyone. Like, even in the United States alone, there are more abandoned houses than there are homeless people. So everyone could be housed if we took steps to make those properties livable and get them to people who need to be housed. Like, we have the resources. We just have this weird, especially in the United States, this weird moral
it's an oligarchy.
About, like,
anything, you know?
If you didn't earn it the way I did, you don't deserve it, even if the it in question is, like, the resources to survive.
Yeah, and also, like, what, like, I love the noted, like, you didn't earn this like I did. Like, what the fuck did you do? Like, I just don't understand. Like, oh, you were more, you possibly were able to go to, like, a university or something. Maybe you're a first class, you know, first generation student. That doesn't mean you get to eat, and the guy who's homeless on the street does not. I don't understand that one-to-one comparison. It doesn't compute. So, Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is, it'll make you sick when you sit there and think about it. And I think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade is even more than people are realizing. It's not just a political, it's not just a partisan stance, you know? It's not like specifically like, oh, they're doing this because they're just Republican. There's more to it than that. Like, there really is. It's an expression of like, well, how much can we take away without like, receiving any repercussions?
It's interesting because the way that Roe v. Wade affects so many other rights, it really is something that you can use to kind of get both sides to agree here. Because in the same way free speech means that some people do have people have the right to say things you don't like, the right to travel means that people have the ability to go do things you don't like somewhere else. And that can go both ways, because we're talking now about getting an abortion specifically, but think about, you live in a state where, or like, you know, one state over is a doctor that specializes in some condition you have. Are you allowed to go see that doctor? Does your state get to decide that? And then if you want to go even further to the right, you go, okay, what about guns? Can I legally buy a gun in one state, take it somewhere else? Vice just did a video, actually. You know the Bass Pro Shop that's up here on your way west towards Chicago?
Yeah,
I
know the one.
The Bass Pro Shop that we all saw every time we drive to Chicago or whatever was in a Vice video recently, because they went there to buy a gun with a kid who had just turned 18 to show how easy you can get a gun in Indiana and take it to Chicago where you're not allowed to have it.
And it's like, we had you and I think we talked about that in the interview you did on my channel like forever ago.
I might have messed with it.
I think we didn't talk about that specific Vice video, but we talked about how incredibly, or maybe it was on Facebook, I don't know. I was talking about how insanely easy it is to get guns in Illinois, and everybody's just like, but Chicago, and it's just like, you don't understand. They're not getting it. Like the fact that it's banned is not the reason that there's guns in Chicago. What kind of false equivalency is that? It just means it's easier to get everywhere else in the country.
And it's interesting because there's a lot of connections between the argument about gun laws and the argument about abortion laws, because, you know, the whole traveling to do it, but also, like, what was I going to say?
Well, I about that. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I remember what it is. It's the fact that if laws aren't federal, they don't really work. Like, people say, it doesn't matter if you ban guns because people are going to have them anyway, so don't ban the guns. But they'll turn around and say, no, ban abortions, ban them everywhere, ban them. But it's like, but I thought banning things didn't work because they can just go somewhere else, so you should just leave them be. Like, it just shows another example of hypocrisy. Yeah,
people are gonna. It's really crazy how disconnected people are from like rational thought when it comes to their own personal biases. And as regard to like the states' right issue, I am so fucking over like states' rights like being an excuse for things. Like, let's leave it up to the states. What is this, like a pilgrimage? Like, this isn't the fucking 1700s. Like, we are in an incredibly connected world. Like, it's honestly, it's shocking that we're still able to like hone things in the sense of like, this is like the US law. You know what I mean? Because the world is so global now. So to make it states' rights, it's basically like, it's yet again an idea of like playing to the base of like, okay, you guys individually like this thing in this part, in like this state, we're playing to the base of you. Like, you know, like Colorado lawmakers, in my opinion, a great thing they've done is like, you know, legalize recreational marijuana, stuff like that. But it's not like a federal thing. It's an individual states kind of thing. And
well, and you know, when it comes to the whole states' rights, in some states, in several states, slavery is still legal on the book. I mean, technically, it's still constitutionally legal. They just,
I think Arizona still recognizes Martin Luther King Day as also Robert E. Lee Day. Just throwing that out there.
But yeah, they slavery isn't constitutionally illegal. They just limited it so you can only do it to like prison populations, like the imprisoned, right? But the same way that like there were trigger laws about abortion, where their laws were stricter than what the federal law allowed, so it wasn't like essentially effective until the drop of Roe v. Wade. Texas, Virginia, like there's several states that still on their books it's legal. So all it would take is the right Supreme Court case getting brought back up, or something getting overturned, or whatever it is, and like it's so close, and people don't want to recognize it. The same way with gay marriage has only been legal for like what, 10 years?
Yeah, I think it's been was it 2015 or 2011? I know it's one of those dates. Might have been 2015, right? Maybe it was 2011.
It was.
It's one of those two. I'm pretty sure about that.
It can't just pop up right away. 2015, yeah.
Okay, so not even 10 years yet.
Yeah, actually, my second Pride Parade ever was in Chicago the day after it became federally legal. So it was the most insane Pride I ever went to. It was absolutely like off the walls. It's the best. It's so fun.
I went to an insane Pride that year as well. I was living, I had just it was the year after I graduated high school, or the summer after, and it was in Cincinnati, this huge, city, and it was insane. It was a dope time. We went to the dock. I went to a foam party. It was the bomb. And
so it hasn't.
Go ahead.
It hasn't even been 10 years.
No.
And it's already like next on the chopping block.
It's on the chopping block. Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, say what you will about the Republican Party, they are so much more organized than the Democratic Party. And I think a lot of that has to go to a few things. I think that, with a lot of Dems being bought out by big business anyway, they're really just like, red and blue clothing a lot of the time, like Joe Manchin, for example. But because of that divide, like there's such a huge divide between Joe Manchin and like AOC, right? Even though they're technically the same party or whatever, or like they campaign within the same party and everything. There's so much divide, right? Like there's such a clear divide, and there's so much like back and forth, like arguing amongst like, the farther left side of the Democratic Party, basically like we're just running on the Democratic Party, like we're siding with it because it's a one of two option situation. And it's because of that divide, aside from what happened with Joe Biden, which was like the most organized event that Dems have ever fucking done, we're not organized at all. Like the only time I've ever seen us super organized was when Bernie was kind of beating Joe, and then Joe won, what was it, like South Dakota or something? And then every other Dem running, no matter how far ahead or behind Joe they were in all the other polls, they all dropped down and endorsed him. Because they're like, we have to beat Bernie or we're so fucked. And it's like, why are we so organized when it comes to making sure that you don't play to your base and do what your base actually wants you to do, and like 70% of the country agrees with? But the Republicans are so organized that they were able to basically fuck up the Supreme Court in the matter of 4 years.
Yeah, it's insane. And just the amount of hypocrisy that's just allowed and ignored is such a huge problem, because even with the whole, they wouldn't allow a judge to be nominated during Obama's final year. But
yeah, they kept fighting it, and then it was Lindsey Graham who famously said, like, I would never let a president, whether it was my party or not, elect somebody into the Supreme Court in its last like 40 days or whatever. And then he literally flipped it when it happened with Trump, and he openly admitted that he flipped it. He's like, "Yep, my opinion's changed." It's like, fuck you, Lindsey Graham.
So they voted on that same-sex marriage bill, right? There was Glenn Thompson from Pennsylvania, the Republican. He voted against same-sex marriage, and then 3 days later attended his own son's same-sex wedding.
Are you fucking kidding me?
I would have been like, no, Dad, bye. Like, dear God, no. You don't want this to exist. You don't want this to be allowed. Get out. Like, I hope things were thrown at him at the reception. Like, I would have brought, if I knew this man and I was going to his wedding, I would have brought a crate of rotten tomatoes to throw at this man as a celebratory moment.
Imagine, I just can't. That's how I feel about it. Just bruh. Like, I don't even know what to say. How are you going to vote against same-sex marriage and then go to a beautiful same-sex wedding? I just don't understand.
It's very Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin vibe.
Oh my God. Nothing. I know I talk about this all the time. I don't even, not even just our podcast. I just talk about this all the time. There's nothing funnier to me than when Ben Shapiro is sitting across from Dave Rubin and Dave Rubin's like, you want to come to my wedding? And he's like, I would never come to your wedding. It's like, how the fuck are you civil with somebody like that? That's insane.
Like, thanks, buddy.
I wouldn't come based on the fact that I don't believe gay marriage is okay. I don't believe that there's any constitutional. Did you see that tweet he put out? I don't believe there's any constitutional right to gay marriage. For people who believe that, they're foolish. It's like, well, shut the fuck up. There's plenty. There's plenty.
You know, Dave Rubin is really just bringing it to the forefront and making it acceptable to be against your own interests. People have been doing it for years, but never admitting it out loud. He's just going to start saying it. You know, like,
because it's making him so wealthy.
Or like any minority voting Republican is actively voting against their own, best interest. Dave Rubin's just making it fashionable.
And there's so many far right publications that we just don't even know where their funding comes from. Like, it's not on the books. Nobody knows. Nobody knows who necessarily pays Dave Rubin to talk, but I very much doubt that it's a loyal fan base, considering half of his fan base should hate him inherently for who he is. So yeah, it's just shocking to me, and it's weird to be like a pretend talk show host for money, because that's what he is. Like, we are literally. We will probably have like 10 solid fans by the time this episode comes out, and our fan base is more attached to us than Dave Rubin's to him, because they just listen to him to have their like horrible biases reassured. Like, it sure sucks that I'm gay, says Dave Rubin. Like, what the fuck?
Right.
And then the same thing happened with that Milo guy.
Blair, Milo Yiannopoulos is awful.
That dude's the fucking worst. The worst.
But like, what's her name? Blair White is a trans.
Oh, I know Blair White. Yeah.
I've watched like videos that have like gone over Blair's streams or debates or whatever, and it's like Blair will sit there and struggle to say anything because she wants to defend herself, but she knows that the points that she claims to believe are literally against her. So it's like. It's sad to watch, because I've seen a debate where Blair is there and like there's some guy who's just basically sitting there saying Blair is like a freak, it doesn't deserve to exist and all this stuff. And Blair can't even defend herself because she believes in the same stuff. She just doesn't word it that bluntly. I mean, doesn't like addressing it that bluntly.
There was the stream.
That, but you put yourself there.
There was the debate stream where somebody introduced Blair as he, and Blair is just quiet, and it's like, are you kidding? Like, you're really.
That hurts me.
It's just like, what? Like, how do you just like let this shit go? Like,
yeah. How can you possibly function against your own interests so hard?
It blows my mind. But I mean, there's tons of examples of it. I mean, you got like, Caitlyn Jenner and shit. I mean, there's tons of examples of like,
yeah.
And I think that part of that is the grift, but I also think part of that is like a self hatred. I think there's some of that, like with Steven Crowder, how he like just really, really hates trans people, but he just cannot go an episode of his show without cross-dressing, like in his life.
Yeah, he did that whole thing where he like dressed up like a woman,
and it's because he loves it. Because deep inside he knows he's a total queen, and he just won't embrace it. Whether it be for the grift or like a self lie. I don't know what it is.
It's always interesting how people who hate themselves make it so obvious.
Like what's the one Jesse Lee? Go ahead.
People who are trying to hide something so hard end up like coming all the way back around, and it becomes obvious.
Yeah, like was it Jesse Lee Peterson who is always like beta male, alpha male, and then like he accidentally liked a bunch of gay porn on Twitter on his public account.
Oh yeah.
It's awesome.
Oh, I saw.
Like I'm not. Go ahead.
I saw a tweet or something. I believe it was a tweet, and it was like, from now on, every time someone votes against gay marriage, we get to see their Pornhub search history.
Dude, that would be amazing. You know what Pornhub should do? They could easily, like, because of the cookies that they have, they could easily have the metadata to release. Like, I'm sure that they would, like, it would be a WikiLeaks situation. But if they could just release everyone who, like, is anti, you know, like, gay rights and gay marriage, if they could just release their Pornhub history, that would be incredible.
John Oliver did an episode about internet privacy.
Oh, I saw that. That was nuts.
And he had, like, the cookies to be like, someone who owns this type of phone at this time of day was in the Capitol building looking up this type of material, whatever, like clicking on an ad for like male enhancement or whatever it was. And like, I absolutely love John Oliver for all of the things he has actually made practical and actually used, whether to teach a lesson or to put out information or to show how easy it is. I mean, he did this whole thing where he bought a bunch of people's debt and then just forgave it, like just got rid of it.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Yeah, especially like, you know, I've been kind of weird on HBO because I used to be like, I could say slightly, this is rough for me to say because it's like admitting that you used to be a fan of like the worst thing ever. He's not the worst thing ever, but I used to be a Bill Maher fan like way back in the day, you know? And you
could have said Jordan Peterson or
I have always thought Jordan Peterson was a weird, creepy old man. I've never had a positive opinion of him ever since I heard his like Pinocchio dialogue, essentially explaining why like, you know, trans rights are not real. I'm just like, this guy's a fucking dipshit. Like he may have a degree, but he's not actually that smart. It's fine.
Yeah, Bill Maher's just like very, very liberal in the worst way.
He's like the most corporate lib, and he's such a crotchety old man now. He's like he's taking time. Oh, yeah. Like when that one YouTube girl who was traveling with her boyfriend at the time, and he like killed her, and they were like a traveling YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah. Gabby
Petito, yes, thank you. I could not remember the name. As soon as that happened, there was a segment on his show, basically like this Gabby Petito girl's missing. Hey, isn't it dumb that young people think that traveling on YouTube's a job? I'm like, dude, you talk about politics on the internet just like everybody else. Like, shut the fuck up. You literally have the same job.
Yeah, you just don't get to go as many places as she was.
But because of that,
sitting in one spot doing it.
I was a little tough on like, okay, HBO politics are not like political content is not swinging for me right now. It just seems like all of a sudden it's very corporate. But lately I've kind of liked the John Oliver stuff. So
people criticize John Oliver. The meme is he talks about how capitalism is the problem without ever saying capitalism is the problem.
Which is probably because he knows that he is directly benefiting from this problem in a sense.
Yeah, I mean that's part of it, but like, give him credit for doing as much as he's doing and managing to keep like a spot on a network news thing while being as left-leaning as he is. Because if you know anything about like Jank from the Young Turks, he was on MSNBC and they said, hey, stop talking about this thing. The big guys upstairs don't like it. Mm-hmm. And he was like, no, fuck you. I'm going to talk about it.
And he was a right-wing commentator at the time. You know, like he was like, I wouldn't say he was like super right-wing, but he was not as liberal or as progressive as he is now, or even in like the last 10 years when he was on that.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine a network would like shit out of their ears if they had someone like Jank now trying to get a network show.
Yeah.
And I'm critical of him, just like I am critical of any other commentator. I don't think that there's maybe I guess like Hassan kind of gets a slide for me because he's also like he admits that he can be wrong on things, and he's like he does comedy.
Always comes into the conversation like, I am a dumb himbo who doesn't know anything.
Yeah, he's like, I'm just handsome and on the internet.
He has a degree.
Yeah, he does have a degree. Yeah, but but like, as far as like, if you're comparing, so to speak, like the John Olivers and like the Jenks versus like, the Tucker Carlsons, it's like a no contest. And it's not just because of the side that they represent. It has to do with the grift too. And I just think that it's less of a grift when it comes from them. Like they stand to lose a lot more than to gain by making the content they do.
The bigger the company you work for is, when it comes to media, especially news media, the more right-leaning it's going to be, because the bigger they are, the more they benefit from right-leaning policies that allows them to keep their power and keep their money and avoid taxes and all of that. So it's like, that's why I think the smaller internet-based sources are such a huge deal. Because, when you look at like the Young Turks and stuff, they do some of their own reporting, but they also they take articles from other sources and they analyze them and talk about them and compare them and bring other sources and stuff. And I think that's a huge thing, that they're not just giving you their report. They're taking other pieces and showing you how they connect, showing you, more context.
Yeah, and, I took a little bit of what they do, as well as just like other commentators of just any kind of news. I do sort of the same thing with my movie content, where I'll pull up articles that are not me. They're more substantial articles, like, Variety, whatever it may be, Hollywood Reporter, things that like specifically work in this arena and have like a positive and fair name to them. And I do like that about TYT, that a lot of the times they'll use articles and they'll talk about their biases with the articles. So it's not like they're trying to sell you information and trying to make you believe a certain thing. Like, they're telling you their bias at the door.
Yeah.
And that's important. We got so off traffic of Roe v. Wade, but this was a good conversation though, so it's fine.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, no, this is the not about abortion episode.
Well,
everything around it, right?
I think what's important is that, like, you're keeping me up to date on the politics of things. We're having a good discussion. I think that's mainly what people want, but I do want to reiterate for people that the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the Supreme Court's decision has such a large effect on things that you are not yet aware of. Like, it has the capability to be literally catastrophic. So it's important that you become aware now. You start feeling, you start coming into activism or whatever it may be now and moving now, because we're at a very critical point. Like, the country's more than just divided. The country is in shambles after this, because it seems like 50% of people are making this a personal stride against women, and it did start out that way, but it has even more repercussions than just that. Despite how gross that is, there's actually more bad that can come from it than just that.
Yeah, no matter who you are, being against Roe v. Wade is being against your own self-interest. Because imagine. I can't even imagine. Imagine you're pregnant and you live in Texas and you just want to go visit family in another state and you want your baby. You're not trying to go get an abortion, but you go across the state line and you happen to be going into a state that has more accessible abortions. Like, are you going to get pulled over and questioned by the police? Are they going to pull you out of your car and arrest you because they think you're trying to go get an illegal abortion or whatever?
And now there's all these natural abortion remedies that people are doing, certain teas, stuff like that aren't even necessarily safe, and that's one aspect of it. But then you also have to consider, okay, well, what if you are traveling to a different state? What if you happen to have a miscarriage around the same time? And then there's actually people who are trying to prosecute you over the darkest moment in your fucking entire life.
Yeah, and that already happens. There's already been women who have been either just arrested and had to go through court for some amount of time before it was dropped and realized. There's actually been women who spent time incarcerated until the documents came through and everything happened. And there was like a doctor that testified that this was a spontaneous, naturally occurring abortion. Or, like a spontaneous abortion is just a miscarriage. But, it's no matter who you are, you have a body and you want your own control of it. You want to be able to travel and you want privacy. And those things are so important, and they are also directly connected to this case, and it's being deliberately ignored by the right because they don't want their side to panic about how their rights could be taken away now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, of course, the right, you know, they look at the Supreme Court decision and they automatically see a bigger side of it because, you know, that's what their job is to do. That's the intention. It was never meant to just be a war on women. It's an accurate practice of taking away people's rights and seeing if you can get away with it through the veil of blaming it on a certain group of people that are affected. Like, it's more than just a war on women. It's a war on everyone when it's a war on women.
And, you know, these things are tests. Like, okay, this makes me think of when I was playing We Happy Few, because part of the story, it's you know, it's about, like, post-World War II, but in, like, a weird, trippy world. It talks about how when the Nazis came through, they said, give us your kids or we'll take over. And if you gave them your kids, like, this is something that actually happened in World War II, where they would see if, like, a city would surrender their kids, and if they would just take them over. They weren't going to hold up the deal. You just showed how weak you were, that you were willing to give away the most precious you had and not know what was going to happen to protect yourself. That's nothing. So it's like, they start taking away rights to see how much they can take away and how long it can go before people notice and how far they can take it. It's
like with 9/11, so many personal, like, rights were taken away during that point in time, and they use it as the veil of, like, okay, this was an attack on our country. Now it's like they don't really care that half of us don't like it, because the Supreme Court is what it is, and it's in favor of basically taking away people's rights right now based on their own biases. And as long as it's not 100% of the population is coming after them, then they're like, whatever. They'll all just argue with each other about it until eventually it's too late for them to realize that we've pulled the rug beneath them. Like,
and it doesn't even.
Yeah, go ahead.
It doesn't even matter that, like, I think it's like 90% of the population of the U.S. is pro access to birth control and, like, pro same-sex marriage, and I think abortion is at, like, 60 or 70. Like, it's all higher than 50%. Over half our country wants most of these things, but that doesn't matter because that's not how it translates into our actual representation, because it goes back to gerrymandering and electoral college and how they set it up where the high population, more left-leaning areas, votes count less, so that the few but the loud minority of Republicans have more of a say.
And all the right has to do is play to their base and say it has something to do with Jesus and babies, you know? And the same thing came with, like, trying to, like, push people like Donald Trump into power by, like, starting all of these, you know, Pizzagate conspiracies or this, that, or, like, the Clintons drink children's blood and shit like that. Like, it's all the same thing. And, like, don't get me wrong, there's no tears for the Clintons in this podcast right now. I'm not saying that they're great people. I'm just saying that they're
used as a distraction to be like, oh, go look at them, look at what they're doing.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's what it's always going to be. Well, guys, just if you liked the podcast, if you want to hear us talk more about politically charged things, we should be uploading every Monday, I believe, at noon on my channel, as well as it goes out in podcast form on Spotify. And we're coming to Apple. I'm working on it. It's taking a minute. Apple is the worst at getting your podcast on there. It always takes forever. But yeah, you can check us out there. And then all the links to find Jessica are in the description. She's got a TikTok. It's pretty fly. It's good stuff. I have my own YouTube channel where I review film content, and it's comedy. It's a show. It's really fun. You guys should check it out.
All right, abort the court.
Abort the court. Peace out, kids.